In this video, we're going to take the school children needs assessment case study through the final steps of this process. So in earlier videos, we already identified the target audience and purpose and set goals and objectives. And we talked about data collection tools you could use, but let's apply it now specifically to this case study. In thinking about this case study, what specific data collection tools should we use? What data should we collect? So thinking about pre-existing data that we could collect related to this case study, as well as collecting new data. So you'll see on the left, there's the case study again. And when thinking about what types of data we should collect for our needs assessment, we really need to think about what's the goal and objectives for our needs assessment. So as a reminder, here is the goal and objectives that I wrote for this needs assessment. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to look through the goal and objectives and to consider what types of data would you collect to be able to gather the information to answer the questions related to the objectives. So how are we going to gather this information? Hopefully you look through these and consider some different ways or tools that you could use to measure these particular objectives to find out this information. There definitely are different ways that you could decide to gather this information, but I'm going to show you my thoughts on how I might gather this information. Now again, recognizing that what is actually done in real life will depend on the resources that you have. So some things I thought about with pre-existing data is lunch menus already exist at school, so you can look at those. Also getting some background data about the school, such as the number of students at the school, the percent of students on free and reduced price lunch. That would give me some background information on my target population and thinking about what the dynamics look like within that area community. In new data, I could collect surveys from children on attitudes and beliefs, or I could, then I thought I could, if I have the time and resources, choose a subset of students and have them in focus groups to really understand the reasoning for food choices and barriers. If I didn't have the time or resources to do focus groups, then maybe I would opt to put an open-ended question on a survey. I could do observation within a lunchroom, look at plate waste, which is where you evaluate how much is left on the plate after a student has eaten. Sometimes I'll actually weigh the plate before and after. In this case, it would be the fruits and vegetables to get a more accurate assessment. However, there are ways you can just observe and see how much has been eaten from students. Obviously, that's going to take a lot of time and resources, so you'd have to know if you have that ability doing that in this needs assessment. Alternatively, maybe I would track food inventory or sales of lunches to see if I could get at the fruit and vegetable, at least how much is being taken. The limitation with that is I wouldn't necessarily know how much is actually being consumed by children. I could observe the presentation of fruits and vegetables on several different lunch days, or if I didn't have the time and resources to do that, maybe I'm just going to talk to the nutrition services director about what they do. I could also look at pre-existing nutrition education messages that are posted within the lunchroom in school to get a sense of influencers that might be happening for students, or already initiatives that are being done within the school to try to encourage students to consume more fruits and vegetables. These would all be part of my needs assessment. And hopefully what you can see is that the ideas here for data collection really do parallel what were written in the goals and objectives for my needs assessment. So now thinking about this process, we've actually done everything now through data collection, determining what tools to use. The next step would really be collecting and interpreting the data. So obviously we're not, in this case scenario, we're not going to really go and collect data. We don't have data to interpret, but I do want to just mention a couple of issues you need to consider, and you probably would already recognize these. I've said these several times throughout the videos. When you're thinking about collecting and interpreting data, you do need to think about how much time is it going to take you to collect the data, and then how much time is it going to take you to actually analyze the data. So if it's qualitative, it's going to take you a little more time to look at commonalities across people. Again, depending on how many focus groups or interviews you did, but still you're going to have to collect that information and look at similarities across. Whereas a survey, you can put it into a quantified number, or a direct assessment, you can get some kind of quantified number and do averages or do frequencies, counts of the data. You have to think about your resources. How many, what kind of human resources? Is it just you, or do you have a team that you're able to have them go out and work on this project and collecting data? What type of monetary funds do you have? Have you received a grant from either your internal agency or an external organization to carry out this project? And if you have, then you have to know how much money do you have to devote to the needs assessment, data collection. You have to consider that. And then also software availability. Do you have Excel? Do you have statistical software like SPSS or SAS or some other type of statistical software? Do you have access to Qualtrics, which is an online survey software, or maybe something like SurveyMonkey? Do you have access to those? That might really limit, if you don't have access to some of these, that might really limit how you decide to collect data, because you may not, if you don't have access to an online survey database, you're probably not going to do an online survey. If you don't have funds to pay for that service, then you might opt for a written survey, and then you'd have to think through how you're going to enter that data and summarize that data. Another thing you need to consider is measurement errors. We talked about earlier with thinking about screenings, thinking about equipment, is it accurate? That could be true too for direct assessments and measuring anthropometrics. If you have a scale and it's not calibrated, meaning that you're not convinced that it's measuring truly a correct weight, then it's not accurate. Then you're going to have potential error or misjudgments based on the measurements you take, which then may affect your how you summarize the needs assessment. Are the survey instruments, we talked about them being valid and reliable? If they're not valid and they're not reliable, then you may not have as much confidence in the outcome that comes from the responses. Now, in real life, in a community setting, you may not have the luxury of doing a lot of validity and reliability testing. Hopefully, at the minimum, if you're writing a survey, you at least have someone outside of whoever the team is that's writing the survey, whether it's you or a group of people. You have someone external at least review it, and ideally have someone from the target audience give feedback if possible. If you could just do that at the minimum, that at least will help you to have a better instrument. The last thing to think about with measurement error is training of those who are collecting the data. If you're taking anthropometric data, heights and weights and waist circumference, and the person is not trained then you may get inaccurate results as well. The last step in the needs assessment is thinking about evaluating how the data should be used. So in this example with the school children, we've gone now through all the ideas of what data we're going to collect, and if we've collected and interpreted data, now who we're going to share the findings with. Are we going to modify an existing program, develop a new program, advocate for policy change? So in this case study, I want you to think about, for 1 minute, how would you plan to use the results of this needs assessment? Hopefully you had a chance to think through who might be interested in these results, or how might you use them. Some thoughts I had related to this. I thought, in this case, with this particular needs assessment, perhaps the nutrition services director at the school district level, and the nutrition services director at the school district level, that those individuals would be potentially interested in thinking about this needs assessment, especially if you're thinking that something should be modified within the school and how things are being administered, or if you think some new program should be initiated, then you definitely would want to talk with those individuals who have direct influence over the food system within the schools. Also, another possibility is providing the results of the needs assessment to the agency that was designated this topic area as a high priority for programming. So at the beginning of this case study, it says that local data say this high priority for programming. There must be an agency who has said this has established this as a high priority. So it should go back to them, because there may be possibilities from your needs assessment that you could get some funding to be able to do a new program, or to modify an existing program, or to be involved in advocacy work to be able to make changes. The children themselves, giving them the results of the needs assessment, since they are the target audience and the ones that we wanted to know more about their behavior. Perhaps if we want to take this needs assessment and make changes, letting the children know the results might be a benefit to going towards making a new program, or changing behavior in a new program, or modifying an existing one and changing their behavior. Maybe parents of children would be interested in understanding the results of that needs assessment of their children's perceptions and opinions about fruits and vegetables and what's being available at school. They could be influencers as well in the next step after the needs assessment, which might be that you want to, if the results from the assessment show that they're not consuming a variety of fruits and vegetables, then maybe you want to encourage that, and parents could be one of those keys in a potential future program. Teachers, they have influence too on children, so maybe they would be interested in knowing the results of this needs assessment. So that takes us through the entire process of a needs assessment. If you do have further questions, don't hesitate to ask.